I never thought a Thursday afternoon at the bookstore could feel like this. The place smelled of worn paper and coffee, sun slicing through the tall windows, and dust motes dancing in lazy patterns. She was there, of course, my girlfriend's best friend, though best friend somehow made her sound smaller than she actually was. Tall, confident, mid-40s, with hair that had just enough silver to make it look deliberate instead of accidental. She had a laugh that could slice through the quiet, and right now, she was crouched by the philosophy section, pretending to be absorbed in a worn copy of Nietzsche while the sunlight caught her profile in a way that made me stupidly aware of every detail. The line of her jaw, the crease near her eye, the way her hands moved like they had somewhere important to go. I was shelving new arrivals, trying not to look too often, though I did. Every now and then, she'd glance up, catch my eye, and then immediately look back at the page, but not without that faint half-smile that made my stomach twist. It was like we were having a conversation without words, a language built entirely of hesitation and small gestures. I tried to focus on my work, stacking books, straightening titles, but my hands were slow, and I caught myself staring again. She stood then, brushing a strand of hair from her face, and came over under the pretense of asking me something about a new release. Her voice was quiet, careful, but there was something in it, a subtle undertone that made me listen twice. "You've been avoiding the poetry section all week," she said. I laughed a little too loudly. I've been busy." She tilted her head, watching me like she was cataloging every nervous tick. I wanted to tell her I didn't know how to explain why being near her made my chest tighten, why I could feel her attention before she even spoke. Instead, I said, "You're here more than usual yourself." She smirked, just enough to be teasing, but not entirely. It was like she knew exactly what she was doing, that every glance, every word, every tiny pause had weight. I hated and loved that I was already trying to decipher her intentions, reading signals that may not even exist. We fell silent, and for a few moments, it was just us and the faint rustle of pages and the distant whir of the register. She leaned slightly, close enough that the warmth of her presence brushed against me. My hands itched to do something, anything, but I froze, aware of every inch between us. Then, almost casually, she said, "I know you feel this too." It wasn't a question. It wasn't a challenge. Just a statement, soft and calm, like she was naming something we'd both been pretending didn't exist. And in that instant, the room shrank, and I felt a pull I couldn't name, couldn't fight. I looked down at the book in my hands and realized it had nothing to do with books anymore. My heart was loud, and yet I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I could only watch her, the way she stood there, confident and calm, like she knew exactly what she had done to me, like she had been waiting for this moment all along. I don't know how long I stayed like that, frozen, but even now, hours later, I can still feel the echo of her words, and the way her hand lingered near mine as if the air itself had become a thread connecting us. And somehow, I knew I would spend the rest of the day thinking about it, imagining what it meant, and wondering if I could ever stop noticing her, ever stop feeling this pull that had nothing to do with reason and everything to do with the way she existed in the same space as me. It was late afternoon at the hotel where she worked part-time, rearranging the small library section in the lounge. I'd offered to help, mostly because I couldn't think of a reason not to be near her, and partly because the way she moved between shelves was mesmerizing, efficient, deliberate, but with a faint air of weariness she didn't try to hide. She was quiet, unusually so, her shoulders slightly hunched as if carrying a weight I couldn't name. I caught the line of her jaw as she leaned to pick up a fallen book, and for a fraction of a second, her hair slipped over her face. She brushed it back without looking at me, a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it said more than words ever could. I noticed everything. The way her fingers lingered on the spines of the books, as if seeking something she didn't know she'd find. The faint tremor in her hand when she passed me a volume. The way her eyes scanned the ceiling when she laughed at a joke I hadn't made, as if she was trying to hide the edges of herself from the world. "You missed this shelf?" I said softly, handing her a stack. My voice sounded louder than I wanted, and I cursed myself inwardly. She gave me a small smile, quick, fleeting, like a bird that almost lands and then flies again. "Thanks," she said, then paused, and I felt her hesitate in a way that made the air between us feel heavier. She shifted her weight, brushing a hand over her face, and I saw the faint line of exhaustion there. No makeup, just raw, human fatigue. We worked in silence for a while, the quiet punctuated only by the faint rustle of pages and the low hum of the air conditioner. I stayed close, careful not to crowd her, but close enough that I could feel the subtle warmth radiating from her. Every so often, her gaze met mine and quickly darted away, leaving a trace of tension that made my chest tighten. Then she paused by the window, arms crossed, staring out at the street below. I sensed her vulnerability even before she spoke, a small crack in the confident, controlled exterior she wore like armor. "Do you ever feel like you're just drifting?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't look at me, but I could see the edges of uncertainty in her posture, the almost imperceptible slump of her shoulders. I didn't answer immediately. I just handed her the next book and watched her, wondering what to say that wouldn't sound foolish or intrusive. She let out a soft sigh, almost apologetic, and I felt an unsteady pull toward her, the kind that made your chest feel too small and your hands itch with wanting to reach out. When she finally turned to me, it was only for a moment, but that brief, unguarded glance, the flicker of vulnerability in her eyes, the soft curve of her lips, stayed with me. I realized I had been holding my breath. And then, before either of us could speak again, her hand brushed mine while placing a book on the shelf. Not deliberately, not awkwardly, just a fleeting touch, but enough. Enough to make me pause. Enough to make the quiet room hum with something unspoken. And as she stepped back, giving me that small, tight-lipped smile, I could feel it. The gentle, forbidden pull of energy between us, quiet but undeniable, a thread that neither of us could, or wanted to, ignore. It was past 9 when the storm hit, and the office felt smaller than it actually was, the fluorescent lights humming above us while rain pounded the windows. She was there, finishing up paperwork she insisted had to be done tonight, and I had stayed behind to help, or maybe to justify being near her again. We were sitting on opposite sides of the small conference table, and yet I could feel the space between us shrinking with every passing minute. She leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table, and I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers as she flipped through the documents. I wanted to reach out, to steady her hand or offer a word of comfort, but something stopped me, some invisible line that we both seemed painfully aware of. "You should probably get home," I said finally, trying to sound casual, though my voice betrayed the tension. "I know," she murmured, eyes flicking to mine, then back to the papers. "But it's easier to stay here than think too much." I didn't ask what she meant. Some things, I decided, were better left unsaid. And yet, the heaviness of her words hung in the air between us, thick as the storm outside. There was a silence then, comfortable and uncomfortable at once. I could see the way the light caught the strands of hair that had fallen across her face, the faint curve of her neck as she tilted her head to read, the subtle bite of her lip when she realized she'd been staring. I felt a pull in my chest, one that screamed for movement yet cautioned restraint. And then, her phone vibrated, loud against the quiet. She glanced at it, her expression tightening as a name flashed across the screen. I saw the flash of something unreadable, annoyance, guilt, hesitation, and she silenced it quickly. Not a word, not a glance at me, but the shift in her shoulders told me enough. I swallowed, my own restraint battling with the magnetic draw toward her. I wanted to lean across the table, to brush the hair from her face, to say something that would break the fragile balance between us. But I didn't. I only sat there, aware of every breath, every movement, every small, accidental closeness. At one point, our knees brushed under the table. Neither of us moved, and the slight contact seemed amplified in the silent room, loud enough to make my pulse stutter. She didn't look at me. I didn't look at her. But I felt it, the unspoken acknowledgement of something dangerous, something neither of us could name yet. A crash of thunder made her jump, and I reached instinctively, only to catch myself halfway. My hand hovered in the air, suspended between intent and impossibility. She laughed softly, nervously, the sound vibrating against my chest, and I realized I'd been holding my breath the whole time. When the storm passed, the tension lingered, unbroken, like a cord that refused to resolve. I left shortly after, but the memory of our proximity, of the almost touch, haunted me. That fleeting brush of knees, that laugh, that suspended hand, it stayed with me, a quiet ache I couldn't shake. And somewhere deep down, I knew we both felt it. The thin, dangerous line between what we wanted and what we couldn't allow ourselves to have. We sat across from each other on the worn leather couch in her apartment, the city humming faintly beyond the window. Rain had stopped, leaving streets slick and reflective, and the dim light cast everything in a pale gold. I had been helping her unpack boxes, books mostly, but now the room had fallen quiet, and the weight between us was suddenly impossible to ignore. She set down a book, straightened the spine, then looked at me. Not the polite glance, not the casual acknowledgement. This was a look that held all the things neither of us had dared to speak. And I knew she felt it as clearly as I did. I don't know what this is, she said finally, her voice low, almost breaking, but she didn't avert her gaze. Her fingers fidgeted with the edge of a cushion. I mean, why does it matter? I felt my chest tighten. I wanted to answer, to explain, but every word I could think of seemed too blunt, too inadequate, too dangerous. So I said nothing, just let the silence stretch between us. She sighed, small and sharp, like she was exhaling something she hadn't known she'd been holding. It's stupid. I'm being stupid. She stopped, shook her head slightly. Her lips pressed together, and I noticed the way her jaw flexed when she tried to control herself. The room seemed to shrink around her, and somehow I wanted to crawl closer, to reassure her, though I knew that would change everything. I swallowed. I don't think it's stupid, I said quietly, just enough for her to hear, but not enough to fill the emptiness between us. Her eyes flicked down, then back up, and she leaned back against the couch, crossing her arms. Then what is it? What are we doing? The words hit me with the weight of sudden truth. I wanted to say anything, but the right thing wasn't coming. Instead, I noticed how tired she looked, the faint shadow under her eyes, the way her hands trembled when she absent-mindedly smoothed the fabric of her sweater. We just stared. Long, unbroken, dangerous. The kind of silence that both exposes and protects at the same time. My mind raced, cataloging every imperfection, every subtle sign of her humanity I had been memorizing for weeks. Her voice broke the quiet again, softer now. I can't pretend anymore, she whispered. Her eyes glistened just slightly. I can't pretend that this is normal, that nothing's happening, that I don't notice. I didn't move, didn't speak. My throat tightened, and the words I had rehearsed over and over refused to exist in the moment. I could only sit there, absorbing the fragile, raw honesty that had finally broken the dam between us. She turned her gaze to the floor, and for a heartbeat, I thought she might crumble entirely. Then she whispered something I could barely hear over the pulse in my own ears. I don't know if I can stop thinking about it, about you, about this. And just like that, the air between us felt too thick, too fragile, too full of possibility and impossibility all at once. I didn't expect her to bring it up. Not here, not now, not while we were surrounded by boxes and the faint smell of old books. She sat cross-legged on the floor, a photo album open between us, and her fingers hovered over the edges of a picture she didn't pick up. I haven't looked at this in years, she said quietly. Her voice carried that fragile weight I had learned to recognize, the kind that made me hold my breath without thinking. It was before him, before everything changed. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded, trying not to make her feel rushed, trying not to seem intrusive. The photo was of a younger version of her, smiling in a way that didn't reach her eyes, standing beside someone I didn't know. He left, she said finally, voice almost breaking. I thought I'd never get over it. I thought I was too old, too broken, too tired. Her laugh was soft, bitter, and it made my stomach twist in ways I didn't want to analyze. I didn't reach for her, though I wanted to. Instead, I said, "You're not the same person you were then." My voice sounded small in the quiet room. She looked at me, and there was a flicker in her eyes, something unguarded, vulnerable. "I'm not. But some days I still feel like her. Like I'm looking for someone I lost a long time ago." She swallowed. The motion barely perceptible, but I noticed every detail. The way her throat tightened, the slight tremor in her hand as she brushed a strand of hair away. We didn't speak for a moment, letting the quiet swell around us, punctuated only by the soft rustle of pages as she closed the album. And then, unexpectedly, I remembered something. How her laugh last week had caught me off guard, how her eyes had lingered on mine, and how, somehow, she reminded me of someone else I'd lost long ago, someone whose memory had been tucked away in a corner of my mind. I swallowed the lump in my throat and said, softly, "You remind me of someone I shouldn't think about anymore." Her eyes lifted, sharp now, curious but cautious. "Who?" I shook my head, not wanting to risk unraveling the fragile thread that held us in this quiet space. "Doesn't matter," I said, but the weight of it lingered, heavy in the air. She looked down again, and I saw her shoulders slump just slightly, a release I hadn't expected. She let out a soft breath, almost like admitting something to herself, and then said, "I guess some things never really leave us, do they?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. I could only watch her, noticing the small details, the way the light hit her hair, the gentle curve of her lips as she whispered to herself, the faint tremor in her hands. Everything about her felt unguarded, exposed, and unbearably human. Then she reached for the album again, turning it so the photo faced me. Her fingers brushed mine, light, unintentional maybe, but enough. Enough to make the air between us pulse with something quiet, something seismic. And I realized, with a weight I couldn't shake, that this tiny, fragile connection had shifted everything between us. We ended up in the lounge again, long after the hotel's quiet hours had started. The city outside was soft and muted, the occasional distant car a faint reminder that life went on beyond these walls. We sat in the same worn armchairs, close enough that the space between us felt less like a measurement and more like a shared atmosphere. She didn't speak immediately. She just tilted her head, looking at me with that familiar intensity I'd spent weeks memorizing. I wanted to say something, anything, but words felt too clumsy, too loud for this fragile bubble we'd created. Finally, she whispered, "I don't know why it's been like this, or why it feels inevitable." I nodded slowly. I didn't need to explain. We both knew. We'd circled around it, danced through silence and stolen glances, lived in the tension that had become ordinary yet unbearable. Now here, in this quiet corner, all the unsaid things felt unnecessary. She shifted slightly, brushing her fingers along the edge of the table. I noticed it, the small, deliberate gesture, not meant for me, but still reaching me. I reached out, almost by instinct, and our hands met. Not tightly, not urgently, just a light, lingering touch. Enough to acknowledge everything without forcing it into words. We sat like that for a long while, letting the silence carry its own meaning. She exhaled softly, a sound that seemed to settle into me, and I realized that all the tension, all the hesitation, all the questions that had haunted us were now just part of a shared rhythm. "I think," she said quietly, hesitant, almost afraid of the sound of her own voice. "I think I've been waiting for this. For something like this. Even if I didn't know it." I swallowed, letting the truth sit between us. "Me too," I whispered. Not as a confession, not as a promise, but as a simple recognition. It was enough. That acknowledgement, fragile, understated, was everything. We didn't lean in. We didn't kiss. That wasn't what this was about. It was about proximity without pretense, about seeing each other fully without the need to define it. The weight of weeks, of stolen moments and quiet longing, had finally settled into something real, something mutual. She tilted her head again, brushing her forehead lightly against my hand as I left it resting on the arm of the chair. A small, accidental contact that felt monumental. Her fingers lingered, and I didn't move away. The subtle warmth, the faint pulse beneath the skin, said more than any words ever could. For a moment, I thought the world outside had ceased to exist. The hum of the city, the occasional shuffle of staff, the distant clatter of a cart, it all faded. All that remained was her, and me, and the fragile, undeniable connection that had been growing quietly, persistently, through every hesitant glance and every unspoken thought. And then, finally, the quiet settled around us. Not heavy, not tense, just present, whole, earned. I realized that this slow, impossible, delicate thing was enough, and I could rest with that. Looking back now, it feels almost surreal how quietly everything shifted. The tension, the stolen glances, the unspoken pull. It all led to a space neither of us could have forced, a space that simply existed once we stopped pretending it didn't. I've learned that some connections aren't sudden or dramatic. They creep in through moments you almost ignore, moments you feel too intensely to name, and suddenly they're everything. She has changed, too. I see it when we sit together, or when she laughs without reservation, or when she tilts her head just slightly, trusting me to notice the small details she's always tried to hide. There's a softness now, not weakness, but an openness that wasn't there before. She carries her past heartbreak differently, not as a shadow, but as part of the light that makes her the woman I've come to recognize in ways I didn't think possible. For me, it's learning the weight and value of patience, of noticing, really noticing, and letting life unfold in its own imperfect rhythm. I've discovered that restraint doesn't diminish intimacy. It shapes it, sharpens it, makes it undeniable when the right moment comes. I can't say that I expected this to happen, but I can say I'm grateful it did. Grateful that our story isn't about fireworks or declarations, but about the quiet gravity two people can have on each other when they finally allow themselves to exist honestly in the same space. Love, I've realized, isn't always about confessions or dramatic gestures. It's about small touches that linger, glances that speak volumes, and silences that hum with understanding. It's about the recognition that the other person's presence can make the ordinary extraordinary. And it's about knowing that some of the deepest bonds are earned through subtle, patient persistence rather than lightning strikes. We still have our moments of awkwardness, of hesitation, of unspoken tension, but now they feel familiar, even comforting. We've grown into a rhythm where trust and attention replace fear and uncertainty. And in that quiet evolution, I've seen what it means to truly see someone, not as a fleeting desire or a story to be told, but as a human being, complicated and flawed, beautiful in their imperfection. I catch myself thinking about her at unexpected times, the tilt of her head, the way she lingers over small details, the softness of her laughter. And I smile, quietly, because that pull that once felt forbidden now feels like the natural gravity of our connection, earned and cherished. Some things remain unspoken, some questions remain unanswered, and maybe they always will, but somehow, that's okay. We've learned that love doesn't have to be loud to be real, and that sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that unfold slowly, almost imperceptibly, until you realize they've become part of your life. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?